Welcome to Mindful News. This is the second installment, something inspired by Russell Brand's Choose News, where week by week he talks about the main events around the world, and he puts in his perspective, he digs out what's important to him. I've been passionate about mindfulness for many years now. It's what I talk about on my podcast. It's actually what I talk about with most of my friends and family. And then week by week we're bombarded with stories and articles about mindfulness, and I thought I'd share some of the stories that fascinated me and hopefully will inspire and fascinate you too. So subscribe to Mindful News on YouTube and Facebook, and check out the podcast on renaissancepodcast.com. We have some pretty cool conversations with some amazing people in the mindfulness community. So a few weeks ago we had Mark Williamson, the director of Action for Happiness, a very good friend of mine. In the podcast we spoke about his journey to become the director of Action for Happiness, and the change from a corporate lifestyle into pursuing a career of helping people. The motto, create more happiness in the world and reduce the suffering. What really struck me is how mindfulness for him actually helped with the physical problems he was having. So much so that he was able to, ride his bike again and get back into the physical activities that, because of this pain, he wasn't able to do. I was introduced to mindfulness not because I had a back pain or stress. It was just a mate, and I really liked the concept and spending a time alone with your thoughts and how you can learn so much from that. So to hear someone talk about how it really changed their life around on that physical aspect, I thought was fascinating. So check out Mark Williamson.
And it turned out, that actually a lot of muscle pain is caused by tension, which is caused by stress, not by physical problems so much. And it really shocking. So when I read about this, I thought this sounds like nonsense. Yeah. But this book that Kate gave me helped me learn what I now know to be called mindfulness. Actually, at the time it was like a breathing exercise, but it was stopping, tuning into how you're feeling, breathing, calming. And I kid you not, I went from being, I'm in pain constantly, sometimes I can't get out of bed, sort of level of agony, I've stopped doing any sport, to being running again, playing sport, living a pretty normal life again within about 2 or 3 weeks. It was literally like, well, how does that work? That's crazy. And it flipped my head because the rational scientist in me said that doesn't make any sense. But basically it was the beginning of hang on a second, what goes on in here has massive effects on everything, our relationships, but also our physical functioning.
Another area that we're really seeing mindfulness grow in popularity is in the sports world. Take, for example, the legendary coach Phil Jackson. He's coached basketball teams such as the Chicago Bulls and the LA Lakers, and he used mindfulness to help both teams, which is pretty incredible because, both teams enjoyed extreme success. Not to say that mindfulness is the only reason why they've been so successful, but Phil Jackson himself says how important that mindfulness was as far as being able to develop teamwork. Individuals have more self-confidence and physically for their bodies to feel the best that they can be, improve the immune system, lower blood pressure, just the ability to perform at the highest, to gain those little edges at the highest level. Well, in the studio, we had Michael Venom Page, who is the UK's most promising mixed martial artist. Recently competed in a boxing match under the David Hay logo, but he's currently fighting in an American promotion called Bellator, which is something that's rivaling the UFC. But he joins me in the studio, quite an honor, and this is his take on the mental aspect of the game.
And guys, log into his podcast, Renaissance Podcast. Go on his website, renaissancepodcast.com. Yeah. It's about meditation, massively important, especially for sporting athletes. This is one thing that very few people talk about, the mental preparation
aspects,
the mental aspects leading up to a fight, just before you're about to fight, or even after the fight, and how people are. We were speaking the other day about how Rose must have felt,
the whole Thug Rose thing,
going through the whole thing, how she broke down afterwards, in one of her interviews, and again, it's just, there's a mental thing that people that you don't see because it's not in front of you.
It's the invisible battle, isn't it?
It's the invisible battle.
You don't see it unless you got like the glasses on.
Exactly.
So those things that we were noticing her, you're looking for her to. Does she look scared? In the weigh-ins, but then she looked stone cold in the weigh-ins. Oh, and then in the interview afterwards, then the emotion kicks in.
Yeah. And everyone's different. Everyone is different, but it's about knowing oneself.
And recently there was a Mindfulness in America conference where amazing speakers such as Daniel Goleman, who's recently released a book on mindfulness called The Science of Meditation in the UK, or in the States known as Altered Traits, John Kabat-Zinn was there, Richard Davidson. There was a whole host of these really, really amazing people that are contributing significantly as far as the science and putting a curriculum in place to help scale it out. I don't really like to use the word scale out, but they do a great job of taking these complex ideas and put them into a form where it's easily digestible. And I think that's been the key to the explosion of mindfulness. It's these, like the 8-week course from John Kabat-Zinn, just putting it in a form that we can understand, that we can help to train other people. And a good friend of mine, Stein, attended that event, wrote a great article in it. I'll share the link here. And he's got that up on his website, wisdomfeed.com. And he retells the story of meeting Daniel Goleman.
Right. So, I don't know, maybe 3 weeks ago, there was kind of a pretentious name on the surface, the Mindfulness Summit, the Mindfulness in America Summit. But you know what? It was quite relevant. I have been going to the Wisdom 2.0 conferences every other year since it started. It was a phenomenal event. It was very special. Well, it was Arianna Huffington, John Kabat-Zinn, Dan Goleman. Anyway, so talk about street smart mindfulness. So turned out I was able to go to be at the lunch for all the presenters at this summit. And on the way back to the event, Dan Goleman and his wife was having lunch. And I knew Dan. Dan Goleman was a science writer for the New York Times years ago. Anyway, I had recorded him telling this story. While we're walking, it dawned on me that I remembered this story that I happened to hear Dan tell years ago. So him and Rich say, okay, let's hear it. The other day I sat down for lunch, had my newspaper, had my sandwich, had a cup of coffee. I took a bite of my sandwich, had a sip of coffee, looked at my newspaper. Then 2 minutes later, I looked down and my sandwich was gone. And then Dan said, who ate your sandwich? Exactly bleeping right question. Who ate my sandwich? Where was I? I ate it. It's in my belly, but I missed anything after the first bite. The next thing I knew, I'm picking up a few crumbs because I probably could have eaten a little more or something like that.
Yeah, so go check out wisdomfeed.com. The subcategories about mindfulness, spirituality, psychology. Go check it out and show your support. I was informed last week that my father's suffers from terrible Parkinson's, and in fact, he's bedbound. Over the past couple of months, he can't speak no more. And just the other day, he was unable to swallow. And this means he's eating less, when in fact he hasn't really been eating anything for the past, 4 or 5 days. So the body's getting weaker, the immune system's getting weaker, and we had to have a conversation with the doctors about end-of-life care. And, talk about your, one of those recurring negative thoughts, just in that meeting, leaving the hospital, just like every couple of seconds, bang, your dad, what's going to happen? And you think about funeral, then you think about giving my speech in the church, and it's a perfect opportunity just to take that breath and use your daily practice of noticing thoughts to, for me now, paying particular attention for these negative ones, especially about my father. Not to say that I don't want to think about him, but just in these moments of absolute sadness, when I do think about it, to use the muscle I've been developing to notice that thought, just like any of my other thousands of thoughts that I have every day, not to pay more attention to that one. And yes, I may cry, I may feel really upset, but when I take that breath, I do get that space. When you are launched back into that present moment, not in the past, not in the future, just for that little split second, everything's great. Everything's fine. And yes, immediately afterwards, I might have that same thought again, but then I apply that same technique again. For those that are in a similar position or just in, suffering deeply about something terrible, with this mindfulness practice, it's not going to cure it all, but it will certainly help cope with the whole thing. And you just remind yourself that life is good. Even if you were to lose anything and just had the breath, that was all that was left, then this is also good. I'll keep these coming more regularly. And again, Renaissance Podcast. Check out my talks with Daniel Goleman, John Kabat-Zinn, Chad Mentang, Mark Williamson. I share some really cool information that's just really easily digestible. And again, follow on Facebook, subscribe on YouTube, Mindful News. Have a great week.